So I'd like to call the October 9th, 2023 Peachtree City Planning Commission meeting to order. If all those would please stand and say the pledge. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. I want to make sure that I turn my phone off because I know it was on still. Please, if you make sure that you do the same, we would appreciate that. I'm going to go ahead and start right in. Item 2, additions or deletions. Do we have any additions or deletions? Okay. Announcements and reports.
Well, this is our first Planning Commission meeting. It's on. Okay. This is our first Planning Commission meeting of the term. For some of you all, let's see, we've got Felicia was reappointed, or she was filling an unexpired term for Mr. Gresham, and so she is joining us now for her first full term. And then we have Andrew Kriz, who is now moved up from being an alternate and fulfilling or starting as a voting member. And we have a new alternate, Mr. Raymond Leota. So I just wanted to kind of get everybody acquainted with the new board, the new commission, and welcome everybody. We're going to be talking at the very end of this meeting. We'll be going over a lot of information, not just about the Planning Commission, but the whole development process to kind of reintroduce it and just refresh as well. So, and then, and as part of that, I wanted to ask if there are any of you all who would like to have access to a city laptop at this meeting. It would stay here when you're not at the meeting, but we would have it set up for you so that when you arrived at the meeting, it had a PDF of the packet loaded up for you. If there's anybody, okay, Mr. Leota, anybody else who might be interested in having one of those? Okay. And so I don't know if you have already, but there will be a computer thing that we need to get you to sign. You've already done it. Perfect. Then that's it. Thank you.
And again, I'd like to welcome our new alternate, Mr. Leota. Welcome to the Planning Commission. Definitely going to look for your input, your experience, your knowledge as we go forward this next year. So again, welcome. And I'd like to re-welcome our members who are rejoining us for this next term. So Felicia and Andrew, thank you very much. Definitely look forward to working with you again as we go forward throughout this year. So thank you again for your time. Thank you. Okay, anything else, announcements, reports? Okay, approval of the minutes. So hopefully everyone has had a good opportunity. There was a lot of information in last meeting's minutes. Hopefully had a good opportunity to review that. So do we have a motion to approve the minutes from September 25th, 2023 as presented?
So moved.
I should ask first, are there any additions or deletions to the minutes?
We didn't receive any comments.
Good. Okay.
Yeah, I move to approve the minutes as presented.
Do we have a second?
Second.
Okay. So we have a motion to approve the minutes as submitted and a second. All those in favor of approving the minutes, please say aye.
Aye.
Aye. All those opposed? Okay. The minutes from the September 25th, 2023 Commissioners meeting are approved as submitted. Item 5, public hearing. We do not have a public hearing this evening. Item 6, old agenda items. Anything for old agenda?
Not the old agenda, no,
Not
sir.
the old agenda?
We brought it back as a workshop
Yep.
item.
Okay. Item 7, new agenda items. So our first item, 231001, elections for chairperson and vice chairperson. As we go through every year, we need a chairperson and vice chairperson to help lead the commission. So I'm going to go ahead and start it off. Do we have any nominations for chairperson for the Planning Commission?
Mr. Chairperson, I'd like to nominate Scott Rittenhouse for the chairperson position for the Peachtree City Planning Commission for this term.
So we have a nomination for Scott Rittenhouse for the chairperson. Do we have a second?
Second.
Okay, so we have a nomination as well as a second. Any discussion? Any discussion? Okay. All those in favor of Scott Rittenhouse for chairperson, please say aye.
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 All those opposed? Okay, I am now chairperson for this year, I guess. Thank you very much. In my absence, if there is a case, we need a vice chairperson. So I'd like to go ahead and have a nomination for vice chair. Do we have a nomination?
I'd like to nominate Kenneth Hamner for vice chair.
So we have a nomination for Kenneth Hamner for vice chair. Do we have a second?
Second.
So we have a nomination and a second. Any discussion? And I should ask, are you okay with the nomination? Because I didn't ask myself.
I'm okay.
Okay, so we have a nomination and second. All those in favor of Kenneth Hamner for vice chairperson, please say aye.
Aye.
All those opposed? Okay, congratulations, Kenneth. You
Thank
are
you.
vice chairperson for this year.
Thank you.
Excellent. Okay, new agenda item number 2, 231002, conceptual site plan, 1401 MOBA Drive, Moon Valley Nursery. I'd like to turn it over to staff.
All right, good evening. So South Tree Commercial has brought us a conceptual site plan, again, for 1401 MOBA Drive, which is Lot 6 in the MOBA complex. It is zoned general industrial. You can see it right there, Lot 6 in the yellow box. And the parcel is 3.16 acres. The proposal is for a tree and plant nursery, which is permitted in the GI zoning district as long as there are no direct sales to the general public. The site improvements, you can see, is for a small office building. That's the orange box here. It has a little outdoor sort of seating area. But it's mostly an open yard business. It includes the product yard, which is quite large. It'll be compacted gravel. And then there's a worker's yard over here where they will store equipment, and that's a concrete yard. And then, of course, a parking area in the front. The property was previously granted 2 variances. The first one decreases the front setback along MOBA Drive from the typical requirement of 50 feet down to 30 feet. And the per the GI zoning district, the setback on there's no parking or service area permitted in the front setback. So along MOBA Way, the second variance allows parking to encroach into the front setback. That would be the second variance. Anyway, side setback 20 feet, which is over here, is a side setback, and then being along Highway 74, there's a 60-foot landscape buffer along 74, and they are meeting that requirement as well. The parking requirement for an open yard business is calculated based on floor area, the number of employees, and also the number of company vehicles that will be parked on site. And in this case, they came up with the building, the office building is slightly under 2,000 square feet, 1 parking space. They have 30 employees and about 10 company vehicles on site, 41 spaces required. They're providing 44 spaces. And this being along Highway 74, which is an arterial highway, the land development ordinance requires, frontage on the highway requires an architectural review by the Planning Commission, so they will have to come back for that. Staff is of the opinion that the proposed conceptual site plan meets the city ordinances and recommends approval. Should the Planning Commission approve the conceptual site plan, staff recommends the following understanding be considered for adoption. The project design engineer must confirm that existing stormwater ponds were designed for development of Lot 6. Otherwise, the lot will have to comply with current requirements.
Okay, good.
And if I may, just a minor notice about kind of this use in the GI district. Imagine, operates very much like the granite and marble warehouse, where a person may visit the site and specifically select a tree or a slab of marble, but then the folks there, the staff there, they actually load it up and take it to either the job site or whatnot. So you may have some public coming and going, but it's not of the volume of like a normal retail location.
Then I also forgot to mention, of course, some pictures of the operation. So they don't plant in the ground. Their plant material is in like these large container boxes, and then also some in, the typical plastic containers, but like the larger, they have some very large plant material in these large boxes, which is what the machinery is for, to move these things around. So they have a forest of boxed trees and plant material that they sell. And these these pictures are from, I think it's the closest location to us in Franklin, Tennessee. So this will be the first location in Georgia.
And Robin, I do appreciate that, because I was wondering the difference, because I did look up Moon Valley Nurseries and what they do and how they started, and that was my question eventually was, how are they going to
Yeah,
handle
I'm not driving
the
up
commercial
there.
and the non-commercial sales, unlike what
It's not
Pikes
like
currently
Pikes.
does and things like
Yeah,
that. So
you're not going there and yes, you
Picking
pick
it
it
up,
up,
putting
but
it
then
back
put
in
it in
your
the
car.
back of your
Yep.
truck. You can see the size of these, the kinds of material that they're dealing with. I don't want to compare it, it's not exactly like Stover's, but that's the general idea. You and I, if we've got a landscape contractor, they can say, why don't you go pick out the crepe myrtles that you want, and that's what you do. But then either your landscape contractor or this service provider, they load it up on their truck and they take it to you as part of a delivery.
okay.
But then does the sale take place there or is it usually between a contractor?
I don't know specifically how that.
Okay.
Do we have the applicant here with us this evening? A representative?
Yeah, Michelle Peachtree with South Tree Commercial. I want to kind of clarify this. This is a very large tree containers. These things are up to 600-gallon containers, which equate to probably at least a 6 to 8 inch pallet per tree. You're not pulling up there. You're not loading these on your truck or putting them in your truck. What you do is you actually do go up there and you pick out the tree you want. They load it on one of their vehicles. They bring their equipment out and they install it for you. They're not dealing with landscape contractors. Well,
Okay.
They can do a landscape contractor, but they're doing all the install because they warrant the tree. So they're doing the install themselves. And so the customer will purchase and pay for the tree on site, but then they take it out and they deliver it.
Okay.
They've got probably somewhere around 15,000 acres of tree farm around the country. They're based out in Arizona and they're expanding here to the southeast. But they have close to 15,000 acres of tree farms that they grow these in containers off site. And they bring them to the site, unload them there, and then they're on display until they're sold.
Okay, excellent, thank you. Okay, do we have any questions to staff or the applicant? We're going to go ahead and start down with Ray.
I do. I have a few questions. Kind of a follow-up to the staff recommendation that has to do with the stormwater management. And my question is, in this zoning district, what is the impervious coverage maximum? And the follow-up to that is, this compacted gravel, the aggregate gravel over time will essentially be an impervious surface, and I'm wondering if, based on the percentage of the impervious coverage on the lot, did that regional stormwater facility accommodate that much impervious on this lot?
So the only maximum impervious is set for the commercial zoning district. There's no maximum impervious in any of our other zoning districts. And then that's what the staff condition is specifically, we're asking them to answer that question that you just asked about, is the pond that was there built for the whole development, was it built with the assumption that this much impervious surface would exist on that lot? So they're going to have to get an engineer to answer that question, and if not, then they're going to have to do some kind of stormwater maintenance on the site.
That's really my only question line. I think it's a good project. It's in the right place. It sits down lower than the highway, so you really won't see much of this from 74. So I think it's a good location for that.
It was one of the internal comments that we had was whether or not we would recommend waiving the elevation review, given the fact that this yard was going to be stacked with landscaping material and it's lower and the building was a small size. We decided, at this point, we're not making a recommendation, but if that's something that you all wanted to discuss, you could provide us with some guidance.
I can tell you what the building elevation is going to be. It's a wood frame structure, all brick with a hip roof. It's pretty basic. Yeah, but you probably won't be able to see it because of the trees, at least from 74.
Mr. Chairman, I don't have any other comments.
Okay, thank you. Commissioner Chris?
Just one comment for staff. When does this engineering survey for the stormwater, when will that be complete? Will that be completed before they come back to us with the landscape
Oh, yes.
design?
Yes,
Okay,
sir.
okay,
They'll have to do that before they get an LDP issued.
Got it.
So they can't move any dirt or do anything until they've done that study.
Okay, so we'll be assured at that point that it's already been completed and they're taking the right steps to
Yes, sir.
mitigate the stormwater issues. Great, no further questions.
Okay. Commissioner Hammer?
No questions.
Commissioner Reeves?
No questions. I think those were the questions I had in mind about the impervious surface.
No questions?
No questions? Okay, do we have any comments? Commissioner Reeves?
I'm just curious, the type of trees that you're going to have there for sale, will you be selling pecan trees, nut trees, or any type like that?
I think they will, yes.
Okay, that's the only comment I have.
Those are more common in the southeast. It just kind of depends on the location their place is, but those are common in the southeast, so I'm sure they will be.
Well, thank you.
Commissioner Johnson?
I don't know, we don't have any other places like this in Peachtree City, do we? Something like this?
No, ma'am.
Yeah, so I think it's exciting to get something like this here. So I like it. It's great.
Commissioner Hamner?
Yeah, I think it's a really cool project. It's really unique, and excited you picked Peachtree City for it.
Commissioner Chris?
Just echo the comments of my fellow commissioners. Looks great. Excited to have you.
And Commissioner Leota?
No other comments.
Welcome. And I echo the rest of the commissioners. It is a very unique landscaping company. Like I said, I did some research on them, found out how they started and everything in Arizona, how they're spreading out. It is interesting and very exciting that they've picked Peachtree City for this. And I actually have some landscaping probably coming up in the spring, and depending on how this goes and when it happens, maybe looking for some large trees to fill some spots. So,
Okay.
so that's great. So, any other comments or questions? Okay.
So what did we decide on the building elevations? Do we need to bring those back, or?
That really is if you all wanted to waive it or not. It's really your purview. The ordinance says that
Good.
you are the ones
Yeah,
that have to
good
decide
question.
that.
So, do we have any discussion on waiving the elevation?
I mean, I'm okay with waiving it because I think like our new our alternate just said, it's going to be almost impossible to see it from the street.
Yeah.
So,
And just because you waive the review doesn't mean that you're waiving the requirements.
yeah, yeah,
Staff
exactly.
is still going to make sure that it meets those minimum standards
Right.
of the ordinance.
Yep.
I'm also
Commissioner?
comfortable waiving it.
Okay.
I am
Commissioner
too.
Johnson?
Same
Reeves?
here.
Okay.
Yes.
So, let's see, do we have a motion? Or could we get a motion to, I guess it sounds like we're on approval or in favor of this, so to approve 2310 1002, the conceptual site plan, 1401 MOBA Drive, with, and I had it in front of me and I don't, with the, we'll get it here, hold on. I want to make sure that I capture the staff recommendation as soon as I get down to it. I should have kept it open and I did not. Thanks. Okay, if somebody has it, you're more than welcome.
You can
Please
just
go
say
ahead.
with the staff recommendation.
Yeah.
Okay, there we go.
Yeah.
So with the staff recommendation, as well as our recommendation to go ahead and waive the review of the elevation.
So moved. I'd like to make that motion.
Okay, thank you. So we have a recommendation or a motion to approve with those requirements.
Second.
We have a second. Okay, any other discussion? Questions? No? Okay, with that, I'd like to go ahead and have a vote on the approval of 231002 with the staff recommendation as well as the recommendation from the commission. All those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
All those opposed? Okay, so moved.
Very good.
Okay, give me 1 second here. Okay, so we do have a workshop item this evening, and that, again, is the continuation from the public hearing that we had at our last meeting. So it's PW 23-10-01. Again, the continuation of discussion for zoning text amendment to create short-term rental permit and processes. One of the things I kind of, before we get into it,
Sorry.
there's really nothing set up, and I did reach out to Robin. There's really nothing set up in the workshop to either allow or really disallow public comment.
Right.
But we really wanted to go ahead and open this up to get, the public involved again as they did at the last meeting or at the public hearing. One of the things I would like to follow, really just to keep things moving along, is the timing of the comments. Just to make sure that we do have, and I know we don't have a tremendous number of people, but we do have a lot of discussion that we also want to have within the commissioners also. And we do want to be able to present something back to council that is something that they can take and review and make a decision on at either the next council meeting or whenever that comes to council on the agenda, whether or not it is the next one or further down the road. So want to go ahead, and I'm going to turn it back over to staff. And again, when we get to the point where we want public comment, again, we're probably going to keep it about 5 minutes so we can have some discussion, ask some comments and some questions, and then have a good discussion again with the commissioners. So,
Very good.
Robin?
I'm just going to do a very brief overview, not as detailed as the first one. And then I'm going to go over some of the public comment highlights and address those public comment highlights and then turn it back to you all. So always need to start off with why are we even doing this? The purpose of the regulation is to protect the health and safety of both our current residents and our visitors, and to make sure that we're preserving the residential character of neighborhoods. It's so important to our residents. This has been a long process. It started in April of 2022. Most recently, there were four workshops held, no, maybe just 3, and held by the city council before this even started sort of this public comment and adoption process. We did have the public hearing at your last meeting. We're having a public workshop tonight, and if you all move this item forward, it would then land on the November 2nd City Council as a public hearing. So some highlights of the ordinance is that short-term rentals, if you have one at home, would require a permit, and that all existing short-term rentals would have to get a permit. There would be no grandfathering in. As it's drafted right now, a short-term rental would be allowed either as a whole house or bedrooms within a home while the homeowner is also in the home. So it does not have to be owner occupied, but no RVs, detached structures, guest houses, pool houses, tree houses, or any of that would be permitted. No subleasing, and there is a maximum of 1.5%, which may sound scary, but that would actually be about 200 short-term rental unit permit, STR permits issued. At our last scan with our servers, with our third-party monitoring, we had about 96 to 98. So, you know, there's plenty of wiggle room in there, but it would be a first-come, first-served permit. A local contact would be required. This person is drafted right now to be 21 years or older and has to be available 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. And should they be asked to come to the property to rectify some issue, they would need to be able to be at the property within an hour of that being requested. So this can be a managing agent, which is something that requires a license in the state of Georgia, but it does not have to be a managing agent. Managing agents are also responsible for rental and property maintenance. This is just a local contact person. And then we would be mailing, right now the way it's proposed is that we would be mailing that local contact information to every residence within 500 feet of that short-term rental. The minimum standards for the property, there can be no special events or parties permitted. All of the parking has to be off the street and on paved surface. The garbage has to be screened from view from the public street. Only a bedroom can be used for sleeping, and that a maximum of 3 persons per bedroom. And that the noise and parking requirements must be posted on the site along with that local contact information. The application process would require a criminal background check on all of the property owners and LLC agents. There would have to be a past inspection from both the fire marshal and the code enforcement. I'm not going through those specific items, but I do have that slide at the end if you wanted to revisit that. A copy of the guest agreement has to be submitted with the application, and there is a fee, a $400 annual fee. It would be good for 365 days, but if you've allowed that permit to expire past 30 days, then there's an additional $75 late fee. The enforcement is a 3 strikes you're out over any one 12-month period, and each strike or each citation would equal the maximum fine that is permitted by state law, which is a $1,000 fine per citation. But on that third citation, you would have the short-term rental permit revoked for 24 months, and whichever person is found guilty, whether it's the owner or the local contact, would not be able to apply for another short-term rental permit in the city for 24 months. It does not affect that person's other short-term rentals at other properties in the city. Case law requires us to stick with the property on which it's cited. So here are the highlights of the comments that we heard. This is certainly not all of the comments, because we heard quite a bit from folks. And so, but I did want to highlight these because a lot of these items were actually specifically discussed by the City Council before it made its way here. So the first one was whether an existing short-term rental should be grandfathered in. The reason that staff is not recommending this change or changing it to do this is because it's really not as simple as us just looking to see what's listed today, you know, like the day before the ordinance is passed, and comparing it to a list the day after the ordinance is passed. Because sometimes people take these on and off of their, you know, and so they could say, well, 2 years ago I actually had it listed and therefore it should be grandfathered in. We really wanted to just simplify this and say everybody needs to get a permit and there is no grandfathering in. And so that's the way the ordinance is written. The next one was whether or not comment was made that detached structures such as pool houses and guest houses should be allowed to be used for short-term rental. There is, that would create a conflict in our ordinance. Our ordinance is very strict on how guest houses and other types of detached structures can be used. Guest houses where overnight occupancy is permitted is only permitted in 2 zoning districts, the R43 and the ER. These are large lot, they have to be a minimum of 1 acre in the R43 and a minimum of 3 acres in the ER. And there are a lot of conditions that have to be applied to those guest houses. One which it surprises people, it's actually not meant to, you're not allowed to have permanent residency in it. It really is meant for guests. And you're also not allowed to rent it. And so if we created an ordinance that allowed it to be rented for short term, but we have an ordinance that says it can't be rented, we've created a conflict in our ordinance. The other thing that might surprise people is that, yes, you can have detached structures in other zoning districts that have the smaller lots. We've seen pool houses. Some pool houses have kitchens in them and big rec rooms and whatnot. But overnight occupancy is not technically legal in those, not permitted in our ordinance. And so, again, we'd have, and we struggle down in the building department to make sure when people are building these that there are certain things that they don't include in them so that it can't be turned into an overnight occupancy structure. And so if we had an ordinance that allowed it, again, for short term, but we have an ordinance that says it's not permitted for overnight occupancy otherwise, it would create a very difficult conflict in the ordinance. The council did discuss this quite a bit at their, it came up at least twice at their 2 different workshops. Moving on, that an Airbnb or other type of online platforms, they have enough requirements, and this should be enough for the city. The city shouldn't require anything more. It was brought up things like insurance. They have to have $1 million umbrella kind of insurance. One of the items that they were discussing about this was not keeping a register with names, addresses, vehicles, tag numbers was one of the first ones that came up. And I think you may remember we kind of talked back and forth, yes, the police need this, but we can understand why if you were going to live or rent out somebody's Airbnb, how you might be very nervous about giving them your permanent address. And really, the police have everything that they would need with that vehicle and tag number information. And so staff supports removing the requirement of taking somebody's name or not name, but because they're going to get their name anyway, but taking their permanent place of residency off of that requirement and just getting the vehicle information and tag number. We do support that. And then the other was that there shouldn't be any fire marshal inspections or building code inspections. And we feel like the main purpose of having a short-term rental ordinance is that our visitors are protected. And so obviously one of the best ways that we can do that is having the fire marshal go in and make sure that some minimum standards are being met, like the fire extinguisher and whatnot. So that, again, staff would like to see that remain as part of the ordinance. Then there was the proposed, there was some comments about, well, why you're requiring these additional things for short-term rental when they really should apply to the city as a whole. We don't disagree with that. Staff doesn't disagree with that. However, we're tasked right now with just focusing on the short-term rental ordinance. And when I did some research, some of the top most complaints that cities who have a higher percentage of short-term rentals get is based on parking, garbage, and noise. And so those were one of the first, I think, very important aspects of this ordinance, is making sure that because people who don't live here don't always know that garbage pickup in this neighborhood is on Tuesday, and so we want to make sure that our cars aren't parked in the street to prohibit the garbage truck from getting down. We also want to make sure that we don't have garbage spilling out, and sometimes they can have a couple of big cans and whatnot. And we want to make sure that it's kept healthy for the neighbors. And then noise, we actually did have adopted recently within the last 2 years a noise ordinance that does apply citywide. This next item was one that's really got talked about a lot, was this notification letter to all residences within 500 feet. And I think you all asked, who else does this? And so I did go back and refresh that spreadsheet that was distributed to you all before the packet as well as with the packet. Everybody has access to this spreadsheet. And it goes through, I don't know, about a dozen different jurisdictions all over the country, including the metro area. So I focused on the metro Atlanta area to see who else was doing this, and did notice that jurisdictions that require this notification, they had a much stricter or much leaner area. It was either just if only notification was required only if it was like, say, like a townhome or some multi-unit where you touched walls, or only properties that were directly adjacent to, if it were like a single family lot, then you would send it just to the immediate neighbors and not everybody within 500 feet. So information for you all to digest. There was a comment about reducing the local contact person or minimum age from 21 to 18. You know, I have my preference. I know this has nothing to do with alcohol consumption, but it really was just we're asking somebody never will the police call and say, we have a police situation at your short-term rental, you need to show up to do police action. Police officers just don't do that. They live for the action, so they're not going to do that. But if they need to be responsive at all hours of the day or be able to communicate with code enforcement during work hours, I don't know how to say. I echo the comment that was made of a little bit older is not bad. Dealing with somebody who's there's a big difference between somebody who's 18 and somebody who's 21. But I will let you all to discuss that. The next comment was that fees and the fines were too high and negatively impact income. So I did review the fees for all of those jurisdictions on your spreadsheet, as well as I had originally, when I developed the fee, created a fee, it wasn't random. I took a spreadsheet and listed all the different costs. And so that $400 comes from, and this is listed in your memo, $100 for the fire marshal inspection and $100 for the code enforcement inspection. Obviously, that doesn't cover the real costs of having that employee do that work and pay for their vehicle and whatnot. But those were the basic amounts, and that came from what our third-party building inspector charges for their inspections. Then there was a $42.25 mailing cost, and that was because I took an average of how many homes were within 500 feet, and the average home in Peachtree City has 65 residences within 50 feet or 500 feet of them. Multiply that by the cost of a stamp, and that's where that $42.25 came from. And then a half hour of time. I don't know if y'all have ever tried to create a mail merge on Word, but it's not as easy as twinkling your nose. The $75 for the background check and administrative time for reviewing that. I mentioned that cost at our last meeting. And then there was a $70 per permit annual cost share for that third-party monitoring service, which we know is about $7,000 annually, and we estimated 100 short-term rental permits issued. So all of that actually adds up to $409.75. So that is where the $400 came from. But you will see that some of the fines on that, I'm sorry, not fines, because that's a different, but some of the fees on your spreadsheet, some are higher and some are lower. In general, the areas that are very much resort or destination like beach towns or ski towns, way higher. And other jurisdictions that are not are way lower. And it just depends on how much the community wants to essentially subsidize this. Then the next one is, comment is that background checks were not required in other businesses, such as pawnbroker, well, no, I'm sorry, they were not required in most businesses, but they are required in pawnbrokers and massage or like spas, wherever they do massage services, they're required. And then the last comments, there were some general comments about concern over the restriction of private property ownership rights and the lack of police or code enforcement calls or any kind of data showing that the existing short-term rentals are posing an imminent threat to the city. So these were some of the comments, and I'm sure you all remember more than these were made. And so, as Mr. Rittenauer mentioned, for tonight's process, there is going to be a public comment or question element, and then they'll kind of turn that to more of a discussion. It's not quite as formal, so there may be some follow-up questions that you may want to take. And then hopefully, if there's I don't imagine that there's going to be perfect consensus, because we've got 5 different people here, or 6 different people here with 6 different opinions. But if there's some general direction that you all would be able to feel comfortable with, we may make some recommendation to City Council so that they can hear this at their November 2nd meeting.
Good.
So thank you.
Thank you, Robin. Okay, as Robin just said, we're going to go ahead and open it up for public comment and questions. Just as we do with the public hearing, like those who would like to speak, go ahead and give your name and the neighborhood that you live in. And if you'd like to go ahead and address anything to the chairman, that is the best way to do it. And then we can go ahead and follow along with any comments or questions after we go ahead and have that period. Yes?
I'd like to speak to you all about it.
If you, yes,
Split
please.
it by 4 and against?
Yeah, that's what I was going to go ahead and do. So do we have anyone who is in favor of the ordinance as it is currently drafted? No one in favor? Okay. If we have those who are against the ordinance as it is currently drafted, if you would please go to the microphone. And again, state your name and the neighborhood you're in.
Guess I need to move this way down for me.
Welcome to the club.
I'm Kathy Valencia. I'm one of the 4 magistrate judges in Fayette County. I deal with STRs on a regular basis in court, not only on a criminal level, but also on civil day. We have 4 people in the Fayette County Jail that I have personally taken warrants on that were firing guns during making rap videos in short-term rentals in our county, as well as those who were bringing in young boys and raping them in our short-term rentals in our county. So let me just go over what I've personally seen in the court system and what I have had to learn and address in classes as a judge about the short-term rental situation. I'm very much in favor, as you can probably tell, of getting this as restrictive as possible. One of the things we learn in our classes is that it's the needs of the community that you have to take into consideration. So, for example, if you live in Florida and you have a condo, it was probably built and set up with covenants in place that regulate the rentals in your complex and probably even has an on-site manager. But that's not what we're dealing with here. That's a very different situation. We also have the fact that Fayette County and Peachtree City are communities, and we do not want a whole lot of our houses to be sold to corporations that never intend to have their personnel living here in these houses. They are bought specifically for the purpose of renting them out over a number of years in the most efficient way that they want to do that, making as much money as they can. They never intend to have a resident there, and they never intend to keep that house up. It's purely an investment. 26% of the homes in Houston have been sold to corporations who do not have their own person there. They are short-term rentals. That takes the market away from families who want to be here, and it takes the market away from young couples who want to move into the city, but they can't because they're always outbid by that corporate entity that's just an investor and just plans to make a short-term rental out of it. Now, if you notice that certain cities around Georgia, they're pulling back on their short-term rental situation, Savannah and Atlanta, which had basically no regulation at all, are now having to come back in and go back and try to undo the damage that they've done. Atlanta was not having any homes that were going to be available for families, and Savannah has become so overflooded with short-term rentals that now it's basically out of control crime, because this does bring in crime and out of control rental processes. So why do we need it here? One, Peachtree City is an aging city, and as you probably know, most of our subdivisions that are older were built without covenants that addressed short-term rentals, because no one knew of such a thing 30 years ago when these subdivisions were built. My subdivision is Smoke Rise, and that's what happened with Smoke Rise. It does not have any covenants in half of the subdivision, and the front half has older covenants, but they don't address short-term rentals. Just like drones weren't thought of, neither were short-term rentals. So we have all kinds of subdivisions without any type of covenant that would regulate this. Now keep in mind, and I want to point, oh, it's gone, but one of the issues that was raised was that with ownership, you don't want to stifle home ownership. And some of the courts have even said, we don't even know why this is different from renting for a year or something like that. We don't see a difference. Well, I can tell you the difference, and some of the courts are now beginning to notice this and say this. There's an ownership right that says that you can do what you're currently doing and continue doing that. So if you have a resident in your home and you rent to a resident who's going to be in your community and live there for a year and have their license here, you're replacing it with the same thing you bought. You bought a resident and you're replacing it with the resident. But if you buy a house and it's for a residence and you replace it with transient occupancy, that's a very different thing. You're replacing it with something different. You're replacing it with an ongoing, steady business. And with that type of business, it's going to be so important that you require a business license. And here's why. You need to have some documentation that you can contact the people who are in control of this house and who own it, and not just your active manager. Because when bad things happen in in this house, you need to get in touch with the source, not just the real estate agent who's managing it. You need to be able to find out who allowed the rape of these young boys in that house, who allowed the bullets to be fired during rap videos, who rented out their short-term rental and ended up with a squatter in their house that they can't get rid of, and now this particular squatter is having to be brought to court 6 weeks later and evicted through the court system because they have ended up with squatting situations. Here are the things that we've had just on my street, and I think maybe it happened to me because I'm involved with it and I see it in court, and now I've seen it firsthand. I live on Greystone Court in Smoke Rise. During the course of 2 years, when fortunately it was a former neighbor, so it was a person who owned the house and did the short-term renting and did it through a host, an Airbnb host. We had prostitution going on, and if you want to see the pictures, I can show you that. We had the rap videos going on with butter buses picking up the strippers, and with basically people in their underwear stumbling out of the house at 11 at night and getting on the butter bus that was making the boo, boo, boo backup noises and all the noises of the buses at late at night because they were having an event that took place because we are near the Atlanta airport, and here's our community need. People fly in here, they want to rent in Fayette County and Peachtree City. They want to come in and do a short-term rental here because they can do what they want to do here in the rental and then go into Atlanta and then come back and cause chaos for the neighbors. Child trafficking is going on in short-term rentals. This is very well known. There's a lady who runs a charity here in our county. Her name is Mary Frances Bowley. If you would like to talk to her about the child trafficking, where children are trafficked from house to house to house, city to city to city, because they can get away with it. Because if you go to a hotel, a savvy hotel clerk will notice what's going on and will report it to the police. But they can be anonymous in these short-term rentals, and they can move the children, the drugs, and the prostitutes around without being noticed.
Chair Rittenhour, we have two
That's what
and a half minutes
I was
over
going to let her.
time.
Yep. I
Okay.
hate to ask you to
So-
finish up your thoughts, but
Yes.
can you finish them up?
So
Thank
I
you.
know one thought is, I know we have responsible owners in the city who live nearby their rentals, and it's unfortunate that they're going to get caught up in rules and regulations that probably were never needed in their cases. But it is the case that you're going to have to put some very serious rules and regulations in place, and it's absolutely necessary for the community we are, near Atlanta, near the airport, with the crime that comes in with it. And I'll be glad to answer any questions that you have.
Okay, thank you. Do we have any questions from the speaker? No? Thank you very much.
All right, thank you for
Appreciate it.
listening.
Thank you. Yes, sir.
My name is Glenn Valencia. I live on Smoke Rise Court. Imagine on Thursday night, you hear them rolling in, and you don't know what's going to happen the rest of the weekend, but we have a good idea because now we're living it. And we're seeing these guys fighting in their front yard. We're hearing all the music. We're hearing them talking all night because it's a party for them. But we got to get up the next morning on Friday morning and go to work. Then Saturday night, Friday night, Sunday night, they're still partying. You're having to go down there and confront them, not knowing what you're about to get into, but you're that mad about it. And you're furious because your family can't sleep, your kids are studying, there's things that are going on, and you don't know what you're going to do when you get down there. So I would have to call the police, walk down there, video as I'm confronting them to try to get them to calm down. Imagine your neighbors moving because they can't live there next door. They have to sell their houses because they can't put up with it anymore. It was a fiasco. Luckily, we knew the guy that owned the Airbnb. He allowed me to go in the house. I took a video. There were beds in the dining room. There were beds in the atrium. Why do you think there were so many beds in there and what they were doing? We actually saw a true family that rented it one day, and we felt like we should go tell them not to sleep in those beds, because I can guarantee you those guys were not getting up to go to the bathroom at night because they were so drunk. Can you imagine what it'd be like to sleep in those beds? The whole thing was a tragedy. I love Peachtree City. I plan on being here the rest of my life, but at that point we had to make a decision. Do we move at this point because we can't live here any longer? We met with the owner. The owner showed him the videos. Even though I would call him at 2 o'clock at night to tell him what was going on, he'd always call me back the next morning and ask what's happening. He never understood what was happening until we were able to show him the videos of all the things that happened up there. And we could talk about this for hours, or all the stuff. Even the crime rate went up during that time. We had 11 break-ins during that time, one on our street. And I don't think we've had any since they shut down the Airbnb, but when the owner finally agreed to shut it down, we had to agree to let them stay for 6 more months so they could finish out their rentals, and then they moved out quietly. They didn't have to move out because they had a contract, but their attorney decided it was easier to do it that way than to be stuck in court for the next 2 years. It was a time that was a very dark. We were in a very dark place. We didn't know what was going to happen. One of the guys that was in jail, that was in the Airbnb, was a Chicago rapper / gangster. We were able to pull up that he had a gun in that house and show it to the police. They were able to arrest him, and he is now in jail. The only reason that he came in is because he was able to come in on Ubers, and they couldn't track him. They knew he was coming in the airport, but they couldn't tell where he went after that. But they had been looking for him, and like Kathy was saying, some of these guys were shooting, and the bullets went into the neighbors' homes. So the neighbors were, can you imagine that you're sitting in your neighborhood and a bullet comes through? You're living in a third world at this point. So I can go on and on. I would like to, but I know I'm running out of time. But this is a real problem that a lot of people are having all over the nation right now. This is not something that was isolated to our neighborhood in Peachtree City, because I'm talking to people all the time. If you look on Facebook, people are complaining about it. And we got to figure out a way to stop it, or somebody's going to get killed. And I'm surprised that somebody on our street didn't get killed, because we were walking down the street, walking the dog, and this car starts swerving, just slowly getting closer and closer to me, and comes really close. And I can see him on his phone trying to figure out where the Airbnb is. Then he starts to go up the driveway to the Airbnb and can't get up the driveway. So he comes back down simultaneously. There's a golf cart path right here. So a golf cart comes down like this, and he comes down and he goes up the golf cart path. If that would have been seconds later, it would have been a head-on collision with the golf cart, because it's a hill and he had to get a running start to go up. So we were very fortunate that nobody got killed. So I can keep talking, but I'll take any questions. I know I'm running out of time.
Thank you. Is there any questions for the speaker? Anything?
Okay, thank you.
Question more for city staff.
Yes.
On this. So again, we've heard now 2 people speak about the smoke rise situation, which I've no doubt happened on that. But was that, I've heard it also described as, that was a, lack of a better way to describe this, but a non-authorized reuse of a sublet, and not a traditional Airbnb is what we're talking about now. Do you have any additional information? Because we've heard now both that this is now an Airbnb, and also this was a unauthorized use of a sublet.
I had heard what,
An authorized Airbnb sublet by contract with police.
does that answer your question? Either way, I mean,
From
as
city staff.
as a sublease, this owner, if he did it directly through Airbnb, then some of the things would have been permitted, but obviously, like bedrooms and dining rooms, or beds and dining rooms and things like that wouldn't be. But if he leased it to somebody who then turned around and went through Airbnb, that would not be permitted under the way it's drafted now.
The way it's drafted now.
Proposal.
And would that be allowed under regular Airbnb rules as well?
Oh, I think so. I don't think Airbnb has any restrictions against
Okay,
that.
good to know. Thank you.
And the problem is, finding somebody to police this. That's what your problem is.
Yep, definitely. Enforcement is definitely something we need to consider as we work through the ordinance.
Okay.
And we would often call police out when we get smelled marijuana and stuff coming from the house, and there's not much they can do. You have the noise ordinance now, but there are still so many things that does not capture.
Okay. Thank you.
Good evening. My name is Chris Anderson. I am a short-term, I live in Burnham Woods in Peachtree City. I do own a house that we do short-term rentals. And I can say that I know for the past couple of years, Airbnb and VRBO do not allow any parties whatsoever through their platforms. And as an owner, we vet every person that comes to our place anyway. We own it. We love the location. We love the neighborhood. We want, and the people in our neighborhood or in the neighborhood that we have our place know us, and we care about them, they care about us. And we have a good relationship. At the same time, it actually is, it's kind of offensive to know that Peachtree City staff and this permitting process is saying that we are irresponsible in some way and therefore need to have letters sent out to every person within 500 feet that this is the way that you can file a complaint against the owner of the Airbnb if you have an issue with whatever's going on there. It's treating us as if we are not law-abiding citizens in the first place. And that's not fair. For one place that was sublet to somebody else who then went and went through an Airbnb on their own, and having that one issue now cause every other person who is doing this in the city to face allegations in some sort that we are somehow now introducing people that would come and break the law within Peachtree City is very frustrating, because we do not. We have no interest in that at all. We love Peachtree City. We feel that the people in Peachtree City are law-abiding, and the people that want to come here are, and very moral people. So already, no one that we know of that do short-term rentals will allow any kind of party whatsoever happening in their place. They don't want their place to get torn up. That can be huge damage that would cost them huge dollars to try and come back and fix. And so I feel like that's something that's just not reasonable. There aren't any other actual data that show that there are calls to other short-term rentals other than this smoke rise incident that happened more than 2 years ago, before this party thing came through with Airbnb and VRBO. That is now an old issue. It doesn't happen anymore. I just feel like that the commission and the Peachtree City Council should look at the people that live in this community as law-abiding, moral people, as the moral people that we are. All of the people here that we see in our neighborhoods that the cart path brings together are caring, loving people for each other. And we don't attract some other type of people that aren't that way. The people that want to come here are good people that want to come here. And I feel like that should be something that is looked at very closely, that we shouldn't have to put an ordinance in place for the fear that something's going to happen when it really doesn't happen. Please think about that. So any other questions or thoughts for me as a short-term rental owner?
Open up. Commissioners, anything?
No.
No?
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Anderson.
Good evening, Commissioner. Mark Bronson, Kedron. Thank you for your time tonight. I'm also a short-term rental owner, and I agree that criminals should be prosecuted to the fullest extent of the law. No doubt about it. Crime happens in hotels and motels. Crime happens, in fact, at big box stores. There's one that has that reputation in an adjacent county. Are we going to ban all big box stores because a lot of crime happens at that one? I don't think so. I don't like that a business is characterized by somebody else that does something wrong. I don't think that's fair. I don't think that's right. I also don't agree with the characterization that that the city is going to be subsidizing short-term rentals if they aren't charged more. The city brought in over $44,000 worth of tax revenue over 10 months, and that doesn't include all of the short-term rental income, and again, only 10 months. My problems with this ordinance as it's written right now is that it's too vague. We don't know what the law is going to be. As an example, the forms available indicate a more stringent fire inspection than is required by the fire codes. So for example, smoke detectors, there's going to be more stringent battery changing requirement than the manufacturer says is okay. And that might seem nitpicky, but the fact is that it's introducing a lot of extra waste and time and expense that isn't necessary. And we don't have actually all of the information as to what these inspections look like. does it include the entire house, or is it just the short-term rental portion? We don't know. None of that information's in here. The forms are vague, if they even exist. The code enforcement form, I have not been able to get a hold of it as of a couple weeks ago. I think it's poor governance to target one group. I can't imagine, I have not looked up the code for garbage handling in Peachtree City. I'm just gonna bet that you cannot have your garbage overflowing. I think that's probably already an ordinance. If it isn't, it should be. And that should be true for every parcel in the city. So I don't appreciate that, that we're being targeted in that way when we don't even think it's a problem, or has not been shown to be a problem. And I think the laws should be finally tailored to the problems that are in Peachtree City that are actually occurring. There just seems to be a lot of overreach here, and also the notification. I think it's important. I hope that you took the opportunity to review my comments from before. I know there's been a couple more weeks now to look at that, but I think that, you know, for example, the 500-foot from the parcel line, actually what I had asked for was that if the homeowner wanted to, you know, draw that line, whether it be 550 feet, whatever, if that's going to stay, is that the homeowner be able to show what exactly that line looks like for a smaller thing. Instead of doing 500, we're on over 2 acres, and 500 feet is a lot of parcels very far away from the actual structure. And I would think that that 500 feet should actually be, or that foot distance should actually be based on something, not just an arbitrary number. I think that really people need to have the opportunity to go through this whole thing and pick it apart and really understand what's going on. As it's written right now, we don't understand what's going on. It is too vague. Are there any questions? Okay. Thank you for your time.
Thank you. Ms. Brunson?
My name is Suzanne Brown, and I live in Crescent Oak. And I think we've all heard about the horror stories of the Black Hammer situation and the McMansion party mansion. Those are horrendous events. Hopefully, Airbnbs or short-term rentals that are being done within houses will never see stuff like that. And I get that. I kind of have a different concern. The restriction of 1.5% of the entire number of residential households or household units in the city puts a cap at about 200. But here's my issue with that. I live in a community that does not have an HOA. So we don't have any protection about the number of rentals in our Crescent Oak or the number of short-term rentals that could come into Crescent Oak. And if you put into place 1.5% of the entire city, then what's going to happen is all of the communities that have HOAs, that's going to limit how many long-term and short-term rentals can go in there. And if they're already full with how many rentals they can have and it's capped out, then those are going to be looking for neighborhoods that don't have the protection of an HOA. And I'm not going to be able to stop them from coming into my neighborhood or taking over my neighborhood, and I'm not alone. A lot of neighborhoods in Peachtree City no longer have or never had an HOA in place. And I don't know if you know or understand the regulations of trying to put an HOA in place to protect yourself in a situation like this. And it's not just short-term rentals, it could be long-term rentals or, you know, real estate investment trusts coming in and buying up every house in your area to use as a rental. But in order to put an HOA in place, you have to have 100% of the residents in the neighborhood agree to it. And that's never going to happen. So from a legal standpoint, I have no protection because I have no HOA, and I have no way to put an HOA in place to protect myself. So if you say, oh, 1.5% of the entire number of 12,000, whatever it is, households, units in the city, and that caps it at 200, they're going to have to be looking at neighborhoods like mine for investments. And that worries me. The other thing that I have as a concern is the squatters, and that's just recently hit some of the news programs with regard to the fact that we've seen squatters in vacant properties and long-term rentals. They just won't get out. It's really impossible. All of the COVID regulations didn't help things because they were not evicting people. And now you've got squatters coming in as short-term rentals. And that just opens up, you know, just another question. How are you going to stop or remove squatters when that happens? And if that's happening in somebody's household, where they have a bedroom in their house and the person won't leave and they have stuff delivered to them at the house, how do you protect against that? And I don't even know how the short-term rental people are, you know, that are looking at that, how are they going to protect themselves against that? So I bring to you a question, and that is, it's kind of like when you go to the eye doctor and they try one lens and another and they say, is it better A or better B? Better A, better B? Well, here's better A or better B. Is it better to be more restrictive up front and then loosen things up if things go well? Or is it better to just write an ordinance that's not very restrictive? And then when you have all kinds of problems, like some of the communities that Robin mentioned, that are now having to make additional changes and regulate and make things more strict. And that's a question. I'm not telling you which way to go on that. I'm saying, which one is the better way to go? Should you do more restrictive and then ease up if it can be eased up, or be less restrictive and have all kinds of issues that develop over time? Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Brown. Okay, any other speakers? No? Okay, so I'd like to open it now to discussion within the commissioners. Going to go ahead and start at Mr. Leota.
Well, let me say first that I read all the information that was available to me from the prior meetings, the September 25th summary, the interoffice memorandum. I watched some of the video of those meetings, so I have a fairly good understanding of what we're talking about here. So my main comments come from the perspective of our job relative to zoning. In my opinion, is that a short-term rental is a for-profit business that is going to be in a residential area. And in any other zoning type matter, where, say, there's a zone change or a variance required, there's a notice required of some kind so that people know that there could be a change coming. So I'm in favor of the regulation to some extent. I'm not sure the regulation as written is correct or right the way it is right now, but I am in favor of regulating something that will be different in terms of zoning in, say, a single-family subdivision area. I've seen in other jurisdictions public notice requirements for things like this in the 200-foot realm.
That's what we do for zonings.
So that would not be an unreasonable, I guess, pullback from the 500-foot distance in my mind, because it doesn't put the burden, if you talk about noticing someone on an initial establishment of this kind of a business next to your home or your property, it doesn't just put the notice on the adjacent property owners if we went to that extent, but I think 500 feet captures too much area. And 200-foot notice initially, in my mind, establishes a good set of folks who own property that would be mostly affected if things did not operate properly. So I'm in favor of something in the neighborhood of a 200-foot radius notice. I am in favor of a notice within the ordinance. The registration, I think, is important in that it is a business in a residential area that's intended to be residential. As problems occur, there has to be some way for folks who are mostly affected to be able to lodge complaints. Primarily, those are my general comments on what's been written. There's an awful lot there that we could spend hours and hours on, but those are the main ones that I saw we might want to discuss.
Okay, thank you. Commissioner Chris?
Thanks. Once again, I just want to thank our neighbors for coming out. I think it's it's important to get comments into the public record, so thank you for doing that. I think what we're trying to do here is create a balance between responsible and irresponsible property owners. And I think every folk that came into the room last time and this time, we have responsible people coming in and addressing us. So, I think what we're trying to do is create that balance and make sure that we preserve the zoning that we have in place. So, I'm in favor of some sort of regulation in this space. As I stated last time, I've got one of these short-term rentals on my block, and I've seen some negative consequences of having that in the neighborhood. So I'd like to see something that holds those property owners accountable when they don't have control over what's going on their property. Like I said last time, I think that there are some things that we could do to make this a little more palatable to the people that are currently engaging in this business in our city. I think the fines are too high. I'd like to see the fines reduced from 1,000 to either $750 or $500. I agree with Commissioner Leota here that the 500 feet does seem a little bit large, especially after seeing the 62 parcels that staff estimated would need to be notified. I think somewhere in the 200 to 250 feet range is more than reasonable. But I do think that we need something here to create that balance and to stop the problems that we've seen in the news all throughout the country.
Thank you, Commissioner. Commissioner Hamner?
All right, thank you. Again, thank you to everybody who came out. Really appreciate all the comments on that. Last time we talked about this, I said, I posed a question in terms of saying, how much do you want your local government to tell property owners what they can and can't do with their own properties? Mrs. Brown, I actually really like the analogy, the A-B analogy that you did in terms of what's the right approach to this? There's not a silver bullet answer behind any of this, obviously. Do we say that we're going to start small and then legislate or pass ordinances that expand it, or do we go big and then bring it down? There's not a right answer to it. It's probably somewhere in the middle. I will say this: I strongly believe, and I think all of us do up here. I don't want to speak for everybody though, but I believe that the registration absolutely makes sense. I think we need to have an idea in terms of understanding what is happening with our Airbnbs or other properties that are short-term rentals. Again, definitively know how many are out there, where they're located, and things like that, and getting an understanding of everything from that, I think makes sense. Also, I will say this: the smoke rise incident that happened. I've heard of the original. I was in the city council meeting when the parade of people from Smoke Rise came up and told the horror stories from it. That's awful that happened, and I'm sorry that happened to you all.
These were from more than one subdivision, and there are reports to the police from more than one subdivision that there isn't a police report filed unless the police take action. So you don't have the full story of what the neighbors are going through.
Understood. I mean, I will say this: the stories that I mean, we've heard from city staff already saying, of course, like last time, that there was no recorded incidences in terms of police or safety violations within the city itself. Obviously, that may not capture everything that's happening right now. So what's the right way to do this? Like Commissioner Chris was saying just a moment ago, we have a lot of really good people, and a lot of really good people have spoken on this in terms of saying that they have the best of intentions on this. And obviously, we've had people with not so great intentions that have impacted the quality of life that's happened within Peachtree City. Yep.
Protect the citizens, though, not the,
Understood.
not the moneymakers, but the
Understood.
people in the neighborhood who are having to make the reports.
Understood. I mean, it's a delicate balance that needs to happen here. I think, again, it's a no-brainer for us to say, like, let's at least register what's happening right here on this. But then from there, I still believe that, a lot of property owners have the right to do with their property within, obviously, the zoning that's allowed within it, and they're not breaking any laws or anything like that, that they can do what they want with their property on that. I have, on one side of my house, where I am right now, I have a neighbor who is running a coffee rotisserie. He roasts coffee beans out of his house. I have another neighbor right next to me that does piano lessons. So I'm smelling coffee, which I don't like, and I'm hearing, bad music from people trying to learn piano on the other side. Obviously, it's apples and oranges in terms of what those are in comparison to, again, some of the horror stories that we've heard on this. But again, I think that the people who are doing Airbnbs and short-term rentals overall within Peachtree City are doing it right on this. So I don't want it to pass any ordinances that are ultimately going to be really punitive and impact those people when, again, they're doing something with their property that, in my view, should be allowed for it. Ultimately, City Council is going to determine and say, again, Mrs. Brown, to use your analogy, how far do you want to go with this? But to go into some of the specifics on this, in terms of where I think that they could go too far, the 500 feet or 200 feet, whatever you want to call it, I still believe is too much. Again, if you look at, obviously, the things that staff has put out already, this would make us very unique within the way this ordinance is. I just don't agree that there needs to be any sort of mass communication out to those to those neighbors on that. I think, again, we used the analogy a moment ago, like for zoning requests, we do this. Well, this isn't a zoning request. This is people using their property in ways that I believe that is okay for them to do that. So I don't agree with any sort of notices being sent out to property owners on that. Some other things, just to get a little bit more in the weeds on this, in terms of like the fire codes on here. Yes, we should have safety standards that are happening on here, but annually may be too much on that. So I wouldn't agree with that component of it. Other things, and I promise I'll shut up in just a moment, is the agent must be on site within a time limit of that. We say that they need to be within an hour of the property of that. Other municipalities and areas use miles. That may actually be a better, just my opinion on this, but to use miles instead of a time component on it, because what does that time component mean? Of course, Atlanta traffic, how it is. An hour could be, to Fayetteville on this, on a really bad day. So I don't agree with some of the things on that, and to put it more actually defined on that piece. And then as well, the register of guests, we've already talked about that in terms of the license plate could be really good for that component. But those are my major things, is again, I think that we need to strike a balance between ultimately still respecting the rights of people and for them to use their property in ways that are allowed, but at the same time not doing it in ways that's so punitive and would disrupt the way that those people are using those things, while still keeping in mind, obviously, the safety and health of the community, and definitely into consideration on this. Not an easy balance. That was hard to describe all that as well. But it's something that, again, I think that is a great conversation for us to have. I just caution us not to go too far with it.
Yeah, thank you. Commissioner Johnson?
All right, well, staff, I have a couple questions for you, if you could answer first. So prior to April 2022, you're saying there was no regulation whatsoever?
We technically still don't have any regulation
or
for
not
this.
even brought up? Like, this is the first time this has been
This is the first time it's made it this far.
This far, okay. Okay, and then, let's see, so I wanted to ask about the detached buildings because my real estate agent gave us this information because we were considering moving my mother-in-law in with us, these granny pods that people are building. So how is, I'm just curious about that. So that won't be allowed? I mean,
No,
is that,
no,
because it's a separate?
the city is very strict on that. And so
Okay.
when the ordinance was created that allowed guest houses in large lot areas, zoning districts, even then, they were not meant for permanent residency or to be rented out.
Okay. Thank you for answering that. Okay, and so without repeating everything that they said, I agree there needs to be a balance. And again, thank you guys for coming out. I do think there needs to be some kind of regulation, and here are the things that I addressed. So I agree the existing short-term rentals should not be grandfathered in. If this is something that's a new regulation, then it should start from scratch, and everyone should, need to be permitted. So the age of the local agent, I mean, honestly, I think it should be older. And maybe it's because my kids are these ages. I'm just like, can't see them being in charge of that. Well, here's my main thing is so, and this might be through the rental agencies like VRBO and stuff, but you have to be a certain age to rent. Is that part of this too? Like, is there a minimum?
No, we're not.
No.
We're not requiring a minimum age to rent. It's not like you mean like a rental car where you have to be 25 to
Well,
rent a car?
to rent condos at the beach, I mean, you have to be 25. You can't just rent condos because my son tried to do it.
That hasn't been proposed because I honestly don't know how the city could actually enforce that or even begin to
Okay.
regulate that. Like, I don't know how I would know the minimum age of that person who is staying in a legally permitted short-term rental. But, I mean,
Like they don't have to provide identification. I know we talked about home address and all that, but they don't have to provide like an ID or anything to.
I know when I've rented through those major platforms, I did.
Yeah.
I had to provide
Okay.
that, and I'm sure I just didn't even bother to look at the minimum age because I'm way over it. So
Right.
I'm sorry, I don't.
Well, so just as far as that age, I think it could even be older personally. And then as far as the fines and like the permit, I mean, I'm thinking then make the permit, like if people are really serious and they're making money on this, then make the permit maybe 500, but then the fines less, right? Like it's encouraging them, hey, well, they're serious about this, but make the fines not as high would be my recommendation. And then as far as sending the notifications, I like what you found online. I say whoever's on each side of you. Like he said, they're the ones that are going to hear it, right? If it's a townhome, whatever walls are being shared, or if it's a home, the homes on each side. Because I feel like the notification to, hey, here's what you do if you want to complain. I feel like people are going to pick up the phone and call the police anyway, right? Like if something's out of control, that's what most people would do anyway. Probably not go pull that up and figure out the way to complain immediately. So I liked that idea as far as that goes. And that's all I had. Those were the ones I wanted to address.
Thank you, Commissioner Johnson. Commissioner Reeves?
Yes, thank you, Chairman. Full disclosure, my husband and I own a condominium in Florida, and we do just that. We rent it out full-time for profit. One of the things that I'm interested in is exactly where is the city council right now? Have they actually seen the draft that we're actually looking at?
Yes, ma'am, they
Okay.
have.
Okay. So I think one of the things that interests me is that I know we have a lot of requirements, And then we talk about a thing called violations, you know, where we have the fees and everything. I'm just curious exactly what is a violation. Because one of the things that we have is having an agent there in an hour. Let's say there's an incident that takes place, agent is not there in an hour. Is that considered a $1,000 violation?
So that's a really good question, because I do think that people get confused with a notice of violation and a citation.
Okay.
So most of our code enforcement, and I'm not saying that this is how this would work, but when they go out and they see somebody's grass is too high, they issue something called a notice of violation that for any of these dealing with grass, they have 48 hours to take care of it. The officer will be back in 48 hours to make sure, and if it's not taken care of, then they issue the citation. So it's almost like they're given a warning before they get the ticket. And so in this case too, and I think that there is specific language in this that says after 2 failures to respond from that local contact, they could then be cited. So it doesn't, so it's not just one out, you know, you have the opportunity, if you've messed up twice, then they could issue a citation for that. Any of the non-compliance with the ordinance, so let's say, so we do the first inspection, but let's say we get a complaint from the neighbor who is saying that, there's way more people spending the night in this house than they say that we've established the maximum occupancy based on the number of bedrooms and 3 people for bedrooms. And the neighbor calls and says, there's no way, there's 30 people who are sleeping there. Well, so we have the right then to investigate through code enforcement, so we can visit the house and see how do they have it set up? Do they have beds in dining rooms that they've put up after their initial inspection? We can then issue, depending on the severity of the situation, either a notice of violation and give them 48 hours to comply, and then we'll be back and it has to be cleaned up, or they could go ahead and directly do a citation. That's going to be left up to the discretion of the officer who responds. And so I would imagine that if they went into a place that smelled a certain way and had so many people in it and had just an egregious number of violations, that it would just be a straight to citation. Whereas somebody put in bunk beds into a room that now sleeps 4 people, but we said the maximum is 3, we might say, this is a notice of violation, you need to remove that top bunk and get it out, or something like that, and we'll be back in 48 hours. So it just, I don't, because every incident is not going to be identical, you don't want to treat every incident the same. And so that's where the ordinance gives the officer the ability to respond appropriately. Under complaints, it says that a notice of violation, complaints about the property may result in a notice of violation if no, that's not right. Where did it say? There's somewhere that says that it has to be made by 2 different property owners within a certain amount of time. So you can't have that one neighbor who's constantly calling and complaining, and all of a sudden now every time they complain, we're out there writing citations. We are not somebody's personal vendetta tool. That and so the way the ordinance is drafted is so that it has to be substantiated, and it has to be from more than one other property owner. It has to be at least 2 different property owners complaining before it qualifies for a citation.
Can you say one thing, not only as a judge, but as a person who's lived next to it? The 2 houses right next to our Airbnb, one was an older couple. They were so terrified, they went to their basement every Thursday night, and they hid out. And they did not want any of us calling about the things going on, because they thought that being next door would make them a target of the many, many people who were coming in and out of that house. The other lady
Sure. Thank you. I think I have other questions, but just based on that comment, I can understand the fear of retaliation, just sort of the type of work that I do. But I guess my question is now, based on that, I firmly believe that we should have a permitting system, right? With this permitting system, we will know where these homes are. Do we know whether or not there will be any additional policing of these areas? Or is that something that we can look to in an ordinance or something like that?
I mean, we can talk with the chief on how she would look at something like that, but that has not been discussed.
Okay. So one of the other questions I had was concerning a business license. You know, I think it came up at one point, but I'm still not 100% clear as to why it is. Well, tell me this. There are certain businesses in Peachtree City that do require a business license.
Okay, so just so that I don't get on the nerves of my city clerk, she is very particular.
Okay.
It's not technically a business license.
Occupancy
We are not
license.
licensing somebody to operate as a kind of business. Only the state can do that.
Okay.
So it's called an occupational tax certificate. And the way our ordinance is written is that if you are running a business in Peachtree City, you should or you shall get an occupational tax certificate. Now, if you have one somewhere else in Georgia, like let's say you run a tree company and you do tree removal in Peachtree City, you've got lots of residents, but you're actually based out of LaGrange or something like that, that's okay. That LaGrange business OCTAX license or certificate is acceptable here in Peachtree City. So it's just like, you know, your driver's license is okay in most other states. If you go to, that's how it operates. If you've got a license or a tax certificate from another county, it works here. But if you're operating and you live here in Peachtree City and you have a business, either a home occupation or you rent an office space or something like that in Peachtree City, you shall have an occupational tax certificate. Now, the way the ordinance is written right now, we're not requiring one of those to be issued for a short-term rental. That is something that City Council discussed, and they feel like, and you can recommend otherwise, but they discussed and they felt like that was not necessary as for running a short-term rental.
Okay. So I guess my next question is that where does the county attorney fall in all of this? You know, is that something that we would look to as far as the county attorney advising us whether or not?
He has read every single draft and
Okay.
revision of this. We're on version 10 now, so he's reviewed this multiple times.
And as far as an occupational tax is concerned, it seems as though in Peachtree City, people who have a business in their home has to have an occupational tax, correct? I guess what I'm looking for is what is the difference between making money because you have a short-term rental in your house than running a coffee business in your house? What is the difference?
I wouldn't be able to answer that. I mean,
Okay. So, as far as I'm concerned, I think it might be interesting to look at whether or not that's something we should take up, whether or not there should be some sort of occupancy tax for these type businesses.
and keep in mind, we do ours very differently than a lot of jurisdictions. We don't base it on your income as a business. We base it on the number of employees you have. So there's a minimum fee, and then I think it's $112 a year. And then there's a certain amount of fee per chunk of employees that you have. So our office doesn't run that program, so I don't know the intimate details of it. But it isn't, we're not talking a multi-thousand-dollar, cost.
Sure. Okay. So I guess the other question I had really pertains to whether or not we are requiring the owner of the house to be a resident of Peachtree City. And how do we...
Yeah.
Okay.
So we did, that came up with the council. Several of the members asked the city attorney to look into that. And something about the Bill of Rights and commerce across state lines, and way over my head, but basically, no, we cannot regulate how somebody or who owns property, whether it's a person or a company, and we can't. That's why but we can require that local contact person to be within a certain distance or time, and that's how we kind of address that issue.
Okay.
Sort of.
I understand right now that an owner can only have 2 permits for short-term rentals.
No, ma'am. Well, there's no limit on how many short-term rentals you can have as a person. There's just a limit on how many are issued citywide.
Okay. So, what provisions do we have in here that would stop some sort of business or corporation from coming into Peachtree City and, let's say, buying 5 houses?
There's nothing. I mean, there's nothing, and this is a national issue. I mean, there's nothing we can do that can restrict who can own property, and the state of Georgia even doesn't allow us to regulate if that property can be rented or as a primary residence, or rented. Like, we can't say we're only going to allow 30% of the houses to be rented in the city. We can't. The state won't let us do that. So we can't regulate who can own property, whether it's a business or not, and that's not. I mean, that's a huge issue, and it is an issue. I am not negating that. It's just that, unfortunately, this tool cannot fix that problem.
Okay. And so, Ms. Brown, as far as communities are concerned in Peachtree City, do we actually know how many subdivisions we have that don't have HOAs?
We do. It's a lot. Basically, any subdivision that was created and established before 1993, I think is the magic number, probably has expired HOA covenants, probably. Unless they actively continued to update them after 1993, they probably don't have any. We do have a list of all of the active HOAs. The city clerk keeps that, and she does try to keep that contact information. But it is, it's surprisingly small.
Okay, thank you. Oh my goodness. So, I think I like the fines. I think I like the $1,000 fines. Based on some of the interactions and responses that I hear, I would actually support the application fee or the initial fee, the annual fee, maybe even being higher. But the rest of the measures that you have in here, I actually do support. I think 500 feet is a good number of feet for notification. And I think that's about all I have. Thanks.
Okay. Thank you, Commissioner Reeves. Before I guess go into I have a couple questions and definitely some comments. One of the things that the thing that we do need to get to is to be able to provide something back to City Council. And whether it is a approval of the ordinance as drafted, whether it is a denial of the ordinance as drafted, or what I would like to see is a markup or red line of the ordinance as drafted currently. That being said, I think to be able to get to that point of being able to have some type of document to be able to give back to council, and I'm going to ask staff this, and I don't know what the response is going to be. What options do we have? Do we have to have something back to council at this time? Because again, I think we've had discussion, and I'm not really sure how the best way to handle this. You know, I'd love to say, let's lock us in a room and let's come up with a draft, but I don't want to do that to people. But we do need to do something to be able to give them. And I went through the document. I have red lines. I have comments. I'm sure others have the same thing. And how do we get that together, aside from going line by line
Well,
by line
and that's
by line?
the issue here is we have a broad range of opinions.
Yep.
And so the likelihood of getting a majority consensus even
Yeah.
is probably pretty slim. And I don't want that to mean that that's a bad thing. It's just, I need, my job is going to be to reflect that to council and make sure. But what I kind of liked doing was hitting the key issues, and because this ordinance has been chewed on for a long time, I don't know if, you know, if you found errors in it, please let me know, and I can correct those. But otherwise, I think instead of doing like a red line or a line by line, I think we should, my thoughts are, and y'all tell me, is these are the issues we have, and then say 3 of us thought it should be 200 feet, 2 of us thought it should stay 500 feet. 3 of us thought the fines should be reduced, 2 of us thought that they were fine. Do something like that instead of saying, unless there is something that you can all agree on. That's how I would kind of address this, and that's then how I would present it to the council.
Chair Ridenour, I think I'm making a list of things that I think we need to probably address based upon the differing opinions that we've expressed here. You know, I'm seeing number 1 being the permit fees. Are they too high or not high enough? The fine amount, is that amount good or not good enough? The age of the manager, the time and location away from the property of the manager, and the notification radius. Those are the 5 main things that I'm seeing. There's a couple of items that I think, you know, each of us probably would like to discuss further, but I think those are the 5 main things, if there's agreement amongst this group.
Does that sound about right?
I agree with that.
I think those,
Yes.
for the most part, have probably hit the ones that I have. I guess the only other one that I have, and what I would like to add to that, is what Commissioner Reeves brought up, and the occupational tax certificate. That is one thing that, you know, my wife has a business here in town, and we have to have an OTC for that. Of course, we also have to have a license, business license with the state, and I don't think that that's something that, of course, is within our jurisdiction to say. But I do think that since this is a for-profit business, just as any other business being run, whether it's in an individual building or run out of a house, should have an OTC. And I think that also gives another level of, I don't want to say oversight, but kind of oversight as to what is going on. One of the things also I went back and forth with, and I think that's a good point, is notification. When I went through, I actually took out the notification entirely and said, well, if we are really want to do something, is it better to go ahead and set up basically, I don't want to call it a database, but basically an online database through the city that you can go ahead and search, kind of similar to what we had a bit of a time with the tree companies, where you could go in and find out what tree companies were approved by the city. Would we look at something similar to that as to, hey, you know, here it is, you can do a search. Maybe all that information isn't right up front, but you can go in, do a search, and find out if your neighbor or whatever actually has a short-term rental instead of notifying everyone around it. Therefore, if there are any problems, they could go ahead and do whatever they needed to do accordingly. I think from the fine standpoint, I actually think it should be more of a tiered fine, where we start off $500, $750, $1,000. But I don't know if it's the consensus, I'm fine with keeping the fines the way they are at $1,000 apiece. I do think the revocation of the short-term rental license after the third third violation and citation, or not citation, third violation, is what it should be, especially after 3. You know, you look across the other jurisdictions and the application fees vary. Some of them are $100, as you said. Some of them are in other locations where they are more true vacation or true destination locations are much, much higher. And I think, you know, looking at what we have, you know, I would love to say, of course, the Peachtree City is a vacation destination. It's not quite exactly what we are, and that's actually not a bad thing. But I think, you know, having a doable application fee is something that we need. So, you know, I went through, you know, should we have background checks? Should we have different things such as that? You know, what information should we actually get from the people who are renting? And, you know, this to me is in many ways no different than checking into a hotel or motel. Whenever I go to a hotel or motel, I have to show my license. When I rent one, I have to put all my contact information in there. And I think that's something that as these people are renting parts of their house or their whole house out to people, they should have that information. And if ever need be, you know, the police department should be able to go ahead and get that information from them. So I think there's, again, as everyone said, there are some really good things, and there are some things that, well, is it too far? And as we talked about last meeting, you know, we really try to find that happy medium, and knowing that we're not going to please everyone, no matter what direction we take. And if we try to please everyone, we're going to be failing Peachtree City as a whole, and that's something we definitely don't want to do. So I like the idea of going through those 5 points. Like I said, I'd like to add that occupational certificate on there. So if we're good, want to go ahead and start off with that first one?
You have permit fees.
Yep.
So there were a couple suggestions that they should be higher. We heard that 409 was the estimated amount, but it's actually not the actual cost. I'd support a fee of $500.
Okay.
Any conversation on that?
Comments, questions?
I'd certainly support it.
Okay.
Agreed.
Okay. So that's,
I agree with that.
okay. I think we'd like to make the recommendation of a $500 application fee
Okay.
And renewal fee.
And renewal.
and renewal. You with that? Okay, and renewal.
Okay. And then number 2 is the fine amount. There's lots of different suggestions, bringing it down, tiering it, making it high, the whole
I
way
kind
through.
of like your tiered approach.
I do too.
Because that kind of encourages people, oh, it goes up if I do it again, right?
yeah.
Like
I
Will
like
we
that.
look at 500, 750, 1,000?
I
think
really
that
like
was-
that.
I like that too.
It's
I
okay
like
if you,
$1,000.
okay. We can, and that's, I want to report that.
Yeah.
I don't want
Yeah.
to, I mean, if you feel a certain way, you don't have to
Yeah.
agree.
Well, you know, I know we're gonna vote, you know, in the majority rules, but I like the $1,000.
But I don't, I mean, if there's something that somebody feels strongly about, I can say you all recommended this as a body. However, be aware that some commissioners had these strong opinions about certain topics. I'm happy to. And they're going to be listening to this meeting, so they're going to hear it as well.
Mr. Chairman, I don't
Yes.
have any strong feeling about the numbers, but I think it's important for them to be there because that's some teeth that will, you know, require compliance.
Oh, most definitely.
And it has to be there.
Yeah.
It's a consequence to not following the registration rules.
And I think it goes back to, you know, as Robin said, you know, the first one is basically a warning. You know, I guess it depends if it's egregious, and there are multiple violations that there could be, then code enforcement could come at their, you know, decision to go ahead and levy something at that point in time. But, you know, I think we look at it as if somebody does something and, you know, it is an accident or an oversight, do we penalize them to that point that quickly? Now, knowing that they're running a business and they should know what's going on and they should have oversight on what's happening, especially on their property, things do happen. So that's when in my mind I was looking at more of a tiered, still with that 24-month. If you do have 3 violations, you lose it for 24 months. So you lose that income, you lose everything for that period of time. So, but I agree. I mean, if you feel strongly with that, that's definitely something to make sure we record. So overall, good on the tiered 5, 750, 1,000.
Should we do a quick roll call on it, just so that Robin
Sure,
can
yes,
put it
absolutely.
in the minutes?
We can do it, yeah.
Yeah.
So all those in favor of, let me go ahead and do the permit fee since we didn't do that to start off. So
Sure.
all those in favor of $500 permit fee for initial application as well as renewal, please say aye.
Aye.
All those opposed? Okay. For fines, all those in favor of a tiered 500, 750, 1,000, please say aye.
Aye.
Aye. All those opposed?
Nay.
Nay.
Okay, 3-2.
3-2, yep.
And real quick, just the 500 number, just, I support the tier, just not the number,
Okay.
for the initial.
Too low?
Too
You think?
high.
Or too high? Okay.
Yep.
Okay.
And the third item would be the age of the manager.
I hear 18, I hear 21, I hear 45.
Well, if they're 18, they're probably still in high school, so there's no way they're getting there in an hour, is my opinion.
So I have a 19-year-old and a 23-year-old, and I trust both of them, but I probably would not want my 19-year-old making the decision to go ahead and send him over. I actually even question my 23-year-old, but I do think we need to come up with a number, and I think probably, at least in my opinion, 21's a number that a lot of things are based upon. So I think that's probably not a bad number to go with, but again, that's my feelings.
What I will say is that, I've never rented an Airbnb, but I've seen them online. I've seen the age restrictions, and many of them require you to be at least 25 yourself to rent them. So to me, I think 25 would be an acceptable number based upon that by itself.
Can I ask you a quick question? And maybe the Airbnb folks can answer this. Is there a minimum age that Airbnb or the other short-term rental companies require?
For renting?
I honestly don't know.
Okay, all right.
My comment was more.
I think it's up to the owner.
Look at statutes.
It's probably the owner.
For being a real estate agent and you manage rentals.
Right.
That's 18. If you look at statute, state statute for being a manager of an HOA, which you can run into some of these problems there too. That's 18.
Interesting.
So it's, and that was in the concept. Right?
Okay.
Because a lot of that stuff is 18. So you're saying, well, you can manage everything else, but this one little subset, and it's just inconsistent.
Okay, all right.
Okay.
So as far as the age is concerned, for me, I have an 18-year-old, and I think she's very responsible. However, I know the majority of the people that we rent to in our condominium, they have alcohol on the premises. So from that standpoint, and from the standpoint that it is someone's personal residence, I think 18 is too young. I would actually support 25.
Mr. Johnson?
I agree with 25, yeah.
Okay.
18.
That's okay.
Just on principle.
No?
So
I like
what-
25,
5?
more mature.
Okay.
So I would say all except for one, and then that one would prefer the 18.
Yeah.
I went to high school with a boy who was the income. He worked at Waffle House to make income to keep his family. So I know that there are people out there who they have to do that at a young age.
For sure.
Okay, then location, time, distance, force of the of that local contact. Do we want to keep it at 1 hour, or do we want to change it to a distance?
I would say a distance, but to an hour. So still it can be like the hour-ish range, but still a distance, just just to define it better than an hour, because what's an hour? Especially when 7454 happens, like, it's gonna be an hour to get to Best Buy, you know? So, like, yeah.
Y'all's thoughts?
I like that. So what would be your recommendation, like 20 miles
Oh,
to
I
an
don't know.
hour?
I don't know.
Oh, you don't know?
I mean, whatever the number would be for an hour. I don't know what that is.
I mean, do we want to say 45 miles, but must be here, or is that too far away? I just know we've got some police officers who live farther away than 45 miles from the city, but
I mean, any number that I have is just going to be a guess. I mean, 20 comes to mind, but I don't know if that's realistic or not.
so within 20 miles or 1 hour
Or-
travel time?
Yeah, sure.
Okay. Yeah.
I mean, I think at the end of the day, it's, what we're trying to do is set some kind of line in the sand so that somebody has to be responsible to respond.
Sure.
Absolutely.
We don't want the contact person living in another state and have to
Right.
get here. I mean,
Right.
it has to be someone within, like you said, a certain distance to be able to.
Right.
Are you saying it takes an hour to go 20 miles?
Some places.
It's,
Yeah, yeah.
it's bad when we can be in another state or get to the north side of Atlanta. So,
I mean,
yes.
Right.
Yeah, I support that suggestion.
Yeah, I think that's good.
Yeah, me too.
Yeah, and I don't know what, again, I don't know what the exact number is, but I
don't
think
know
we
either.
go with something an hour and 20 miles
Okay.
and send that back to council and see
start.
what they think, yeah.
Yep. Okay.
I'm seeing head nods.
That's good.
Is that unanimous?
good?
Yes.
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
Okay, the big one.
Notification radius. Yeah, I mean, I will speak first, because I was in favor of the 500, but when I saw the 62 homes, I did think that was a little much.
I thought the same thing.
So, I agree with Ray that I think that getting it down to about 200 to 250, somewhere in that range, I think I could support a lesser amount, but I still do think it's a good thing to send out to the neighboring properties. For instance, where I live, there's a green space behind my house, and if I only have to notify the folks that I have adjoining property lines with, then I don't need to notify the folks that are behind that green space, which is only 25 yards, really. So it just doesn't make sense to me to not have a notification, or to only allow notifications at the property lines, because I just don't think that's enough, especially because, I've seen people come and go from the short-term rental that's on my street, and they have parking issues that causes traffic flow concerns for not only the adjoining properties, but then also the entire neighborhood. So I think a notification is necessary. I don't think 500 is appropriate, but I do like the 200 or 250.
Mr. Chairman, I think, expanding it beyond just adjacent property owners doesn't leave the burden on complaining to just those few people. And it puts it in other people's hands potentially, so that if someone, and we've heard that, some folks adjacent to some problem issues have felt terrorized, then people maybe a little further away from just adjacent can make the call. Just a suggestion.
Okay.
So that you don't have to worry about distance and figuring that out. What about just all the houses on the same street?
I'll be honest, that's harder for me to do.
Is it?
It's
Oh,
harder
okay.
for us to
Oh,
administer.
okay.
This,
Okay.
and what rang true for me was the 200 feet. It was, the 500 feet was kind of called a random number, and he's not wrong. But the 200 feet at least complies with other notification that we do. And those are kind of set already as a practice and policy and ordinance. So it's based on something.
That makes sense then.
Okay.
Yeah.
That's good for consistency. 200 feet will be fine.
Okay.
And the only question I had is, the notification, is that annually? Do you notify annually?
It's
or-
part of the, yes ma'am, it's part of
Okay.
the permitting. Basically, the annual renewal is the same process as the regular, the first time you do it.
Perfect.
So is that
Or at
a,
any time there's a change in the contact person.
exactly, yes, yep,
That
that was in the
would be good, too.
ordinance. So would we say, that's not quite unanimous, is the agreement on the 200, correct? Okay. So that's what I'll report is our one outlier.
I know,
Or-
sorry.
No, that's.
Well, I mean, I'm,
Gotta make it complicated.
What's your
There's
thoughts?
always one.
yeah, I'm still back, like I said, on what I was thinking of having it online for, be able to go and do a search.
You know, we can do that anyway.
Yeah.
Yep.
That's,
I think that's something,
we're going to
again,
be creating this database anyway.
it's there.
And it's very, what I love about our permitting software, it's very easy to link it to an online map. And we've got a whole, we've got a new GIS department manager who's got all kinds of fun toys, maps out there
I
to
mean,
play
really,
with.
when it comes down to, I mean, when you get a permit, it is open records. I mean, you're able to go and get that information.
Yeah, but if you
So,
could just
Yeah.
kind of not have to go through that legal
whole
process
process
and
to
just
do it.
click on a map and be
Correct.
able to click on a button and say, who's that local contact for that one right there? That'd be great.
Okay.
I love that idea. Okay.
I'm good
And
with
Mr.
that.
Hamner, your preference is to no notification?
No notification.
Okay. And then the next issue is the occupational tax certificate?
Yeah, I do feel that the business owner should have an occupational tax certificate. You know, they are running a business, just as anyone, whether you're a CPA, whether you're roasting coffee, you know, you are running a business for profit, and they should have an OTC with the city.
But it's my understanding, though, it needs to be an actual registered business, though. Because again, to use like my neighbor who has the piano lessons next door, like they're running a business out of their house, but it's not like a registered business the same way. So I don't think they would need to have like this. Am I wrong on this? Like,
Well,
I am
per
wrong.
our ordinance,
Occupational tax is when you have to register and you're operating a business out of your home.
Okay,
We have to do it.
got it. I didn't
so
know
that piano teacher, as much as we love what he or she is doing, probably should be doing it.
I don't know if
And-
they do or not.
Okay.
So let me be clear. Okay, given that clarifies my concern on that.
And so is there a fee or is there
Mhm.
ongoing
Yeah.
tax that they
No,
pay?
there's a yearly.
It's a fee.
It's a-
It is
it's a
not,
fee.
I know it's called an
I know.
occupational tax.
Yeah,
It's a
okay.
fee.
Okay.
And it's an annual fee, and I think, like I said, there's a minimum, which most of these aren't going to have a huge, you know, they're not going to have 17 or more employees that are going to bump them up to the next fee category. So we really are talking about $100 to $115. So is that a unanimous or
Would your
no?
proposal to make it a part of the permitting process then? That's checked?
Yes.
Yeah,
That would be.
I'd support that, yeah.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay.
So they get that and the permit.
They
Yes.
have to have that for the
Yes.
permit.
They're two different things.
Right.
Yeah.
We can't issue the short term,
permit.
that's how it would be written, is that we won't issue the permit for
Unless
the
they have an OTC.
STR unless they've submitted that.
Correct.
It's honestly what we do for sign permits.
Right.
You have, if you're gonna put a sign up on a building, you have to have an occ tax
Yeah.
for that business, so, yeah.
Okay.
Okay. Was that the last of the items?
That was the last, yeah.
I think that's it, yeah.
Yes, if you don't mind going to the, I haven't asked.
Suzette Brown, I still live in Crescent Oak. I don't want to throw a monkey wrench in here, but there's something I just realized, and I asked the judge while you were deliberating. Is there any place in the ordinance where you stipulate what's going to happen to a short-term rental that's operating without a permit after the permit process goes in place?
Yes, ma'am. They'd be issued a citation, and then they have to, and then what's lovely about our ordinance is it's a double fee.
Okay. I couldn't remember seeing that, and I asked the judge, she didn't remember that either, so.
Well, and it's kind of like any building, basically
Yeah.
we're saying is if you're doing this in the city, you must get a permit. If you're doing it without a permit, then you're subject to citation and double permit fees.
Okay. Just want to make sure.
Yes.
So-
Very
so
good.
Should we make a motion then to recommend approval with our stipulations?
Yes.
Or recommend approval with our recommended?
Well, I guess that is
Is there a
where,
recommendation?
Yeah.
that is where I struggled in going through, how do we send this to council? Because typically, we would go ahead and approve or
Well,
deny.
or you could recommend, you can say approval with these conditions, That's the third option, and those conditions would be that these changes being made, such as the fee increased to 500, the fines tiered, 500, 750, 1,000, the minimum age raised to 25, the location or time is changed to 20 miles or within 1 hour, the notification radius is 200 feet, an occupational tax certificate is required, and those would be how you would make the motion to recommend it. And then when I'm doing the staff report, I'll summarize those, but also note that not all of these were unanimous.
Okay.
Is that acceptable?
Yep.
I know.
I mean, if we're gonna, again, we can vote on it, but if those are gonna be all the stipulations that we vote on, then
I think well, no, you all tell me. Do you want to do it as a packet of all of these together, or do you want to bring them up individually? I think I don't know. I mean, either way, the information is going to be communicated to the city council.
Okay, want to do that?
Yeah.
Okay. So, do we have a motion to, I guess, approve the draft ordinance with the stipulations agreed upon by the commissioners and is listed by staff?
So moved.
Do we have a second?
Second.
Okay. So we have a motion to approve with stipulations, and we have a second. All those in favor, please say aye. Aye. All those opposed?
nay.
Okay.
Okay. Well, I want to thank everyone. Again, there's no perfect answer to this. As you can see, just with the commissioners ourselves, trying to figure out what is best for Peachtree City. And I really feel that is what we try to do is what is best, knowing that sometimes what is best may not be best for me. It may not be best for you, but it's best for everyone in Peachtree City, and that is the most important thing that we try to do. So again, thank you for coming out this evening. Thank you for your comments, your thoughts, your concerns. Want to thank the commissioners for everything. Want to thank staff for going through this again with us. Truly appreciate it. And I know council will definitely appreciate our thoughts and our comments as they go forward with this. I'm sure it's not going to be an easy discussion, even after having 3 workshops or 4 workshops. There's still going to be some additional discussion, I'm sure, that will come out of the next council meeting. So,
Which is going to be publicized as a public hearing and therefore held on November 2nd.
November 2nd. Okay.
And I'll report back to you what they find.
Okay. Next.
I had a bunch of slides. To help.
That's right. I'm sorry. We still have our 101. So do
we
we
do.
want to go through our 101, or do we want to pass our 101 to the next meeting?
I suggest we pass it to the next meeting.
I agree. I'm sorry, Robin, but we're going to pass it to our next meeting.
Gee, I get to go home before 9. Oh.
Yes, you don't have to give it to us again. We'll do it.
Okay.
Just be mindful that there's 2 public hearings on the next meeting.
I'm
2
sorry.
public hearings.
And that's what I was going to.
When is the next?
So it is October 23rd. We have an annexation, and, it's both annexations landed on that meeting.
And so far, 2 building elevations.
Okay.
How about this PowerPoint, usually what I do is after I give it to you guys, I turn it into a PDF and I put it on your library. So it will be publicly accessible. How about I also distribute it to you before the next meeting? Yep. Please review it. It's not all self-explanatory, but at least it'll give you a leg up on things. And then I can either, you can decide at that meeting if again, you want to kind of wait till the next time or something, because and I don't know if you all are aware, but Mr. Leota has a planning and landscape architect background. So he's familiar with the process as well. So I don't feel as bad leaving you guys hanging without this introduction.
And Robin, one other thing, you did send an email out about the 102, the planning 102 class.
Oh, thank you, yes. I have The 102 class is the one in November, correct? Because the 102 is happening before the 101, which was kind of disappointing. But, so I do have 2 people signed up for that. Mr. Leota and Ms. Reeves. You had mentioned a long time ago that you had wanted to do it. If not, that's fine. I can.
I've done the 102.
Oh, why
I
did
did the
have that?
102
Okay.
first. I haven't done the 101.
The 101. Oh, okay. Okay.
So I think the 101 is next week, if I'm not mistaken.
Yeah, it was October 24th. It was too soon. This meeting, I felt like it was too soon to get anybody into the 101. I mean, it's still an option. I think it is still open if anybody's available. But then there's another one. They've got a lot more planned this season. So there's another one in January, I think.
And for those who haven't taken the 101, it is a very good course. I know Councilman Frank DeStadio and myself, we actually did that one. It was online at the time because we were in COVID lockdown. So we didn't get the full interactive, I would say, as you
No
would be
role
on
play?
site. No. But even that, it was very, very informative. So if you haven't had it, haven't had an opportunity to take it, please do. And I will get with you about trying to
Well,
get into
and the
one or two.
dates are listed in this PowerPoint. So I'll email this as a PDF to you all tomorrow so that you can have it and peruse through it for your reading enjoyment before your next meeting.
Well, I did one of them, but I need the other, but I just don't know which one I did.
And I have your certificate, so I'll figure out which one it
Okay.
is
Okay.
and let
Because
you
I
know.
would like to do the second one.
Okay. Anything else from staff? Anything else from the commissioners? Motion to adjourn?
I'd like to make a motion to adjourn.
Second, all those in favor? Aye.